G'day, gang. Good afternoon. It's your man Andy here on the Silver Lining Quarantine Day 4. And I'm quite relieved I've got this young lady on with me today. I kind of needed a kick up the bum from a person like this. Jane CAULFIELD is a
Hi.
She is a woman that I've got to know, I've got to know quite well over the last few months. I've known of her for a lot longer, but got to know her in greater detail over the last little while. And my word, is she bringing an energy and a confidence with her that makes me feel quite calm about stuff. Formerly of Noel Jones, now with Fletcher's, running her own race, calling auctions, and bringing just a personality that is so refreshing to the game. Jane, how are you?
Well, thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me to be here today.
Look, the pleasure is all mine. Now, for those of you that don't know, the Silver Lining Series 2 is all about the greatest comeback. It's all about getting rid and eradicating the language of just writing off this year, which is becoming increasingly popular of an opinion given all the stuff that's going on. But we cannot mistreat time. It is the one commodity that we have got a finite amount of, and we need to make sure that we do everything we can to maximize it as best as possible. So we want to bring out as much energy as we can so that you guys can still rock and roll in the remainder of 2020. Jane, how has the year treated you so far?
Oh, look, it's really, 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 really bloody interesting. What can I say? Okay. Good. It's been a really good year. Started with a bang early in February, January, February. I came back from my honeymoon, which was amazing.
And left hand got a little bit heavier.
And yeah, about time. We've been together for 9 years. Well, what can I say? But there was logic to it, but that's another story. Really good year. Started with a bang. I was listing January, February, and then COVID hit. Wow. Crazy times, really unusual times. So
and how
really proud of the industry.
How did you handle the COVID cloud?
Adapt. Adapt. We, as an industry, we had to adapt. Really proud of the industry, proud of my team and where I'm working at Fletcher's, how readily they adapt to COVID. And I think across the board, I saw that with most of the agencies. So really proud of our industry because we're showing, we all want to be seen as professionals. We don't want to be seen as those car salesmen anymore. So it was a wonderful opportunity for us to show just how professional and how smart we are really and how quickly we can adapt to take care of our clients, both in terms of vendors and purchasers or vendors and buyers. So yeah, it's just been adapting and taking care of our vendors.
Oh, and taking care of each other, I think, more to the point. I think taking care of just the humans that are around us. And I think that's where, and I love the word, I love how you've said that you've been proud of your industry. I don't think that's something that's been said too often up to now, really, if we're to be brutally honest with ourselves, right? I think that this has definitely been a period that has shown people for who they really are. The arseholes have gone quiet. The better people have started to speak up, which is good. Yes. And yeah, there is a bit of a greater sense of pride moving forward, which is it's just a relief for a lot of us. That's it's a shame that it's needed a pandemic to bring it out, right? But there we go. Now, before we crack on and get a little bit D&M, I know we've got a relatively short amount of time because you're an in-demand woman, but give us the quick MO, the quick highlight reel. Human first, professional second. Who is Jane CAULFIELD? What is she about? And give us the highlight reel.
Jane CAULFIELD, I suppose, has a really big heart, takes her job incredibly seriously, and is tenacious.
I
Probably it.
like it. Just that little sting in the tail at the end there. She's a really, really nice woman with a great heart, but don't mess with me. I love it. I love it. Right.
I play out the polarities. You say you're really interested in psychology. Me too. Real estate is all psychology and stats. The more authentic we are, the more we connect with people, the more our work grows. But in terms for myself, it's really interesting. I play out that polarity really well of big soft heart and quite strong. And I think we need to be strong and leaders with our vendors because they're looking for us for direction, but we all know that. So it's something that I love to do, take care of people and lead them in the right way.
And that's where I think that's really a blend that I feel that you, more than a hell of a lot of people that and females, I will say in particular, it's a blend that's not easy to get right. Because there always seems to be, in a lot of cases, a degree of overcompensation, with both genders, right? So you'll get some women that will try and they just try and be masculine about it because that's the way that the industry's been brought up and that's the way that they feel they need to be, and a real big overcompensation going the other way and almost negating their natural DNA advantages to a certain extent. And then you've got the guys on the other side that, I think they've been smoking a little bit too much of the kumbaya pipe and not having the balls to lead, right? I think there is a degree of it, and that's one of the things that I really came to admire about you really, really quickly. It's not an arrogance. It's not an overcompensation. It's not a need to be masculine about it, because you're very much, you are very much have the feminine qualities that that we all love and whatnot. But
it's taken years and years of coaching to trust myself and my strength.
That's what I was going to ask you, Jane, because like for me, you just make me feel calm. Like when I've been around you, when I've spoken to you, you're just very easy to feel calm around, right?
Thank you.
And confident around. How does Jane handle the moments of doubt? So just before we came on, you talked about, that fear, that you do, as we all do, that inherent fear of judgment. How does Jane handle that when she's really in a bit of a corner with respect to those moments of doubt, whether it's personal or professional?
To be honest, and I really, that's one of my key, points of difference in terms of how I deliver to my vendors or people around me is I believe I refer to myself as a lover of truth. I'm quite a spiritual person, and I believe wholeheartedly in truth. And in saying that, I believe we all have moments of doubt. I've done a lot of work on myself during, over the years, and we all succumb to that doubt at some stage of our life. Being in lockdown, the doubt comes up again. You're trying to manage your clients, you're trying to manage your family, you're all in lockdown, and doubt raises its ugly head. One of the things that I've learnt to practice is mindfulness. And so for me, it's becoming the observer and watching the story that's playing out. And the story come from patterns. They come from patterns throughout our life that puts us into doubt. The neurology in our head, they have these patterns, we have these habits, and if you can become the observer and watch them and just sort of say, I like to say, hello, old friend, here it goes again, I'm getting sucked into that vortex, and sort of pull myself aside and say, do I know that to be the story that's playing? Do I know that to be absolutely true? And more often than not, when you get real with yourself, you know that it's not true. I think it's just about, calling yourself out on it when it happens and saying, okay, I've got a choice here. I see it for what it is. I recognize that pattern. Is it true? Am I going to buy into it, or am I going to step forward? I've got a choice this way or that way. What am I choosing to do? really easy to say, not so easy to practice necessarily.
You're preaching,
But
you are preaching, very
yeah.
much so. What started all this?
Look, I had a shit childhood. I had a really terrible, terrible childhood, and
Right.
then I ended up marrying a man that, we were in love, and things turned sour. We separated when my baby, my third, was 8 months old. The relationship turned really, really sour. And then I've never discussed this publicly before. And then later on, it was discovered that he was diagnosed with personality disorder. So
Wow.
it's sort of my anger and my resentment at him. It was wonderful to have that diagnosis, because then my anger at him just fell away, and I was able to see it for the sickness and not for him, to distinguish the difference, and was able then to support him. But needless to say, because of his illness, what actually happened is, from my baby being 8 months old, I raised my 3 children on my own, physically, financially, emotionally. My parents weren't there, and I think that's what's given me the resilience, because I've always had to push myself. I've always had to go hard, and I've done it all for my children, because what do? Do you fall in a heap, or do you just pick yourself up and keep going hard? And you do that for your kids. So I left the marriage. He'd managed to take all the funds away, and I left the marriage with $50, and I'm really proud of what I've achieved. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, on my own. Yeah.
I mean, look, you go through stuff like that. I mean, thank you for sharing that first and foremost. That's. I mean, it goes a hell of a long way to explaining why you are who you are. Because,
well, it gave me a love of psychology, a love of counselling, which I explored, and then, going within myself to find answers that could then propel me, because I had this drive. I had to not only prove this to myself, I had to prove this to my children, because I'm a great believer. I have a really good understanding of social mobility. And and I know that if I didn't step up and show my kids what you could do, then the likelihood of them doing that was going to be pretty low. So, yeah. So I just went hard as much as I could.
It definitely seems like that. I mean,
I don't know.
What really interests me about what you said there, and I think this is something that, if we are all to try and stage this great comeback, I think, again, easy to say, hard to do. I think one of the biggest things that you've said there that I reckon we all need to take on board is really assessing, recalibrating what's going on in here and up here before we move forward and look to stage that comeback. It's very easy to deal with just purely the external, but if your internal systems are still in that old mindset and still in that old way of thinking, then it's ultimately going to be a success or a progression that's not going to be sustainable, right? So with regards to all of the internal work and what you've done and learned about psychology and your internal mechanics and observing your own sort of emotions before making any judgment call and what have you. With regards to your professionalism, that I feel is an asset that would take, if anybody could start to really sort of drill down into that element of it. It's not really something that gets talked about that much, almost in any profession, really. It's always the external, not a hell of a lot about the internal, but in a constructive sense. So with respect to what you've learned and what have you, like how have you managed it? Like, how have you managed to have so many external pressures, yet managed to really do that internal work that's been so fruitful? How have you managed it?
Very little sleep. Very little sleep. I don't know. Drive, I suppose. My kids, my kids, my family. That's, when you look at your values and start to analyse your values, it always comes back to family for me. I've now got a family, a husband and 5 kids, so I've got 2 other kids, and still it always comes down to family. So
how old are the kids now?
Just about to turn 30 and just about to turn 19. So yeah. So
Very
my
good.
baby's 19 now. Yeah.
Your baby's 19, bless him.
Yeah. It makes me feel really old. I stop trying to remind myself, don't ask me their ages. Reminds me of how old I am. I think, look, in terms of resilience, one of the things I had to learn, I had no other opportunity, was, I could have been a victim or I could have just picked myself and gone forward. I chose not the victim way. Instead of blaming others, I chose to take responsibility, knowing that in each moment I have choice, and what my choices were. Eventually that led me into the sales sector. And then for me, this current market is, I'd like to say there's opportunity here. And the reason that I say that is because it ties in very closely. We can give up and we can go, okay, COVID's here, do nothing, I've got no chance. There's the big guys out there, they're going to get the listings, whatever. And it reminds me of when the market crashed in 2017, started to crash. At that time, I had a very similar experience to what you've just gone through. So right at the end of spring, it was the end of November, beginning of December, my father and 2 best friends within 10 days of each other were diagnosed with cancer. So I finished off what I needed to do in terms of my listings, my responsibilities to my clients, knowing we're as agents, we've got 2 responsibilities. One is to our clients and the other is to ourselves, our family. And then took time off to spend time with them. And then came back in the new year. I listed one, and then I had a final inspection and broke my ankle on a stair. But anyway, in high heels, quite embarrassing. And it was during that time where I was facing, the loss of my father and my 2 best friends, that it was really interesting, because I'd been doing real estate in a very male way. I'd had these amazing mentors, and they were all men, and they were all about scripts and dialogues and this and that and that. And I was looking, what do I need to do? What do I need to do? And a really good student, what do I need to do? What do I need to do? And I was getting listings and I was doing well, but there was always something inside me that felt it wasn't me. I wasn't being authentic. It wasn't real. And I'd been spiritual and explored, done a lot of inner work. And yet I felt like I don't know, something wasn't right inside of me. So I was starting to question everything at that time. And then, of course, I broke my ankle because I was coming back. And even though I'd been questioning everything, and I was coming back at what I knew, everything that I knew, which was really male, very strong, very forceful, very male. And yet I know that I'm a compassionate and empathic person. And it was at that time that I was with Noel Jones, and they had Sherry Storer come and do a talk for us. And I was like, oh my goodness gracious, there's this woman that is powerful, that is strong, and yet she has compassion and empathy. I was like, oh my goodness, I want to learn from her. And then, of course, broke my ankle. So what I decided to do in that time, I still go in the office every day, ringing. Of course, I go out with my moon boot on, and no one would list with me. And I don't blame them. Would you? Of course not. So, and I just kept going. But in that time, I just restructured my whole business and my who I was, what my elevator pitch was, and decided there and then to trust myself and connect with people the way Jane does. And what I found is, so I started back on the 1st of July and that financial year, so I'd have 8 months off, no income, and started back and went from 0 to number 1 in all of Noel Jones in that 12-month period. And what I found from that is I learned, and with the guidance of Sherry, her leveraging is just bloody amazing. But being able to do that from my perspective, because for her it was all about helping me to trust who I was and finding the right way for me. So I think right now, energy-wise, with what's happening, it's an opportunity for everyone, because we know that real estate is stats and numbers. You make the calls, you're going to get a listing. How many calls? You should know how many calls you need to do to get an appraisal, and then you know what your appraisal to list, you know what that ratio should be. So it's just, and that gives you hope, reminding yourself when you go home, during that 6-month period, I'd go home and cry. I was getting nothing. I was going into appraisals, but no one would list with me because of my broken ankle. And you remind yourself in those moments where you go to bed and cry that it's a numbers game. And if you just keep going, see the stories in your head, ask, is it true? And you just keep going, because you will be rewarded eventually, I would imagine.
You would hope. What does Jane do? And this is a loaded gun of a question to come back to a point. What does Jane do to look after herself outside of real estate?
Oh, I'm very green. I love my garden. I love camping. I need to get my feet on the soil. We go camping. We go off grid. I get away whenever I can, whenever we can. And playing the garden, cooking. I love cooking
What
from
type
scratch.
of cooking?
So,
what's your go-to?
I hate cooking during the week, I have to say, because we're so busy. I hate coming home and just doing that, slop.
Yeah.
Weekends, dinner parties, stuff like that. Anything. I learnt to cook in Asia. I got married to a Chinese guy in Taiwan when I was doing real estate over there in my early 20s. I married a film director over there. Well,
Wow.
yeah, as I said. So a very avant-garde, passionate, beautiful man. And I learned, he loved to cook. So I learnt to, my mum's a chef. I've always cooked, but I learnt to cook Asian, I cook Indian, I just love cooking, French, whatever, anything, Irish, anything. I just love to create. I suppose that's my place where I get away from it all, where I can turn off from work, because it's not always easy being a real estate agent to turn off. But that's where I get lost.
And that's kind of like the point that I was hoping that we could make together is yes, there is a certain level of determination that is required to really try and create this level of comeback that we're all trying to aspire, or we would all love to achieve.
Yes.
But again, there really has to be an awareness of self and a real need to make sure, because this is another thing that COVID hopefully has done for a few people. It's made them really take a bit of stock. Now, we've seen a lot of people's waistlines got bigger and all that sort of stuff because they've been sat on their bum.
Mine too.
Seriously, you're telling me, my wife dropped off a care package. I've got that many snacks and I can't go anywhere. So it's not going to end well these next 2 weeks. But the big thing about it is if you really want to have a comeback that is sustainable, a momentum that is sustainable, then you need to make sure that the vessel that you are operating in is functioning okay. And I love the passion that you talk about everything with. You always talk about you always tend to have a lick of passion on pretty much anything that comes out of your mouth, right? But I think people need to be allowed to do that. You allow yourself to get away, right?
Yes. And it's tricky. It was something that, Sherry, because I'd push myself, I had a point to prove, to myself, to my kids, and I'd really push myself and I'd get burnout. And when you get burnout, you get cranky. You're not a good parent, you're not a good partner. You're just not a good person. But you don't see it when you're in it. And thankfully I invested in a coach who called me on it and was saying to me, you know, you have to take Fridays off. You have to, you know, all of these things to nurture. You have to have a date night, you know, once a fortnight with your partner. You've got to create all these things. And I felt like I was standing on the precipice, on the cliff, going, I can't do that. My business will fall away. It's like, Sherry, you know, Sherry, I can't do that. And she's going, Jane, you're all going, oh, I've got to trust. And you know what? I didn't take all of Fridays off. I took half a Friday off.
As if we would. People like us, as if we would.
and she was cross with me. And I was like, baby steps. And setting times a reward. So working so much and booking a holiday in and making sure that we did the date nights. I have to say my relationship improved so that he finally asked me to marry him. No, I'm joking here. And just having that time, it's really interesting because when you do step away, you've got time for reflection to look back and you actually come back. Each time I'd come back, I was a better agent. And funnily enough, each time I was away, I got a listing. So people ring and you get a listing. So it's it's just trusting yourself and trusting the process and reminding yourself to be human. You know, yes, we're agents, but we're also human. And so my path of getting to number one and at Noel Jones, you know, what happened with the death of my father, one of my best friends died. That broke me. The other one of them has survived and fought through. And you sort of come into the realization that there's two really critically important things in life, and that's relationship and experience. And if I can bring that into my work with my clients, deliver, you know, create a relationship of trust. You know, there's two types of vendors. Some will never trust you and others will, but you work on that. If you can build that relationship of trust and deliver an experience that they're going to jump for joy about, everything takes care of itself, I believe. Well, that works for me. We're all different, but it works for me.
Well, no, I look, and I think, and I'm conscious that you've got a bolt in the next minute or so, but I think
it's okay. I've created time.
Okay,
if
wonderful.
You need.
That's the thing. The point that you make there that I think is critical in any sales role, let alone something as intimate as real estate, is not being afraid to be human. I think that's massive. I think there's always this preconceived notion that when you put the suit on, it's like you automatically become Optimus Prime. You automatically become this robot that doesn't feel and doesn't experience things, and it's just bizarre because ultimately humans are going to connect with humans before they connect with anything else, right? And it was the same with me when I was frontline. I was exactly the same, like ridiculous, stupid, really work rate. And when our first child came along, my wife used our first child to make me take a day off, and she said, "Andy, you're having a dad day every Wednesday." And that's non-negotiable because otherwise the kid's going to be at home alone, and that's not ideal. Or what? She'll have the dog, but he's a bit useless. So, and the amazing thing that came out of that was when I was in a listing presentation, and I'd say to them, "Look, you can contact me anytime, 24/7. You can do it via SMS. That's absolutely fine. The only day that it's going to take a little bit longer for me to get back to you is on a Wednesday because my priority is my daughter. And I'm sure you can appreciate, she's more important to me than anything else." And
people respect that though, because you're authentic. You told them up straight up, and it brings that human element into it. You are human.
And that's exactly it, right? Like, because ultimately you can have those dad days, not tell clients, and then they get shitty at you because you didn't get back to them within the first couple of hours or whatever. or you didn't set that expectation. But it was just fascinating to see, because I did it really from an organizational point of view, but it was absolutely fascinating to see the demeanor, the instant shift in demeanor, whether it didn't matter what walk of life they came from, whether they were male, female, it really didn't matter. As soon as I said that, their whole aura changed almost instantly. And that was no tactics. That was just me being upfront. So, look, by the way, I'm going to be with my kid. So chances are you don't want me to pick up the phone while I'm changing a nappy. It's not going to work out very well for any of us. And just by being human, and I had no intention of it when I started it, but it's like what you said, just giving yourself the license, the freedom to just be a little bit more of you. I think it's just incredibly important. And it's interesting how you said that the industry had you drilled to be a certain way, and that's, I think, something that we can all learn from.
Yeah, but I take responsibility for that because I didn't know what to do and I looked for it and I chose to mimic it. I take responsibility and it worked for a long time, but I didn't feel real. And I got to the point where I just couldn't do it like that anymore because I felt like a fraud.
And that's the beautiful thing, is the fact it's responsibility. And I think really, if we're really to drill it down, in terms of if people are going to evolve in this industry and evolve in this game and really make a life for themselves via this game, I think that's probably the first word, isn't it? Because there are that many external excuses to not.
I still make them.
We all do, right?
We all do.
But that's because we're all human, right? But I think just acknowledging it in the first place is probably quite important. And understanding, these things that are happening, they're happening to all of us. But interestingly, there are still some people that are doing really quite well.
Yeah.
Yes. Look, Jane, I love chatting to you. You are just fab. And everybody, this is a person that you can find quite easily on social media. Jane CAULFIELD, Fletcher's Real Estate. She does a fabulous job of being a wonderful auctioneer as well, and that's the common ground that we both found ourselves on. And she's an absolutely wonderful person at that as well. When you watch her do auctions, they're just brilliant. They're fab.
A little different.
They're great. That's why I like them. So, Jane, if, just before I let you go, if there was any sort of key message out of all of this that you could impart onto the real estate public and beyond, and tapping into that spirituality that you hold so dear, and that I have a lot of admiration for, what would you impart onto people that are really sort of on the canvas, the referees counting, doing the 10 count, and they really need to get up off the canvas?
Surround yourself with excellent people. You are the company you keep. Learn as much as you can and balance that with learning to trust yourself and your essence, your personality, and let that shine through, and never give up. It's a numbers game, just keep going, give yourself permission to have shitty days, knowing that tomorrow's a new day. Just keep going.
Beautiful way to end this interview. Jane CAULFIELD, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on The Silver Lining and sharing you're just brilliant nature. It's absolutely wonderful.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a blast. Think the world of you, Andy. All the best.
You take care. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. Bye.